The blue lights came up in my mirror at 8:40 on a Tuesday night, 200 yards from my own driveway, and I did the thing that ended 4 careers. I pulled over and complied. I put the truck in park. I put my hands on the wheel at 10 and 2, high, where a man walking up on a vehicle can see them. I did not reach for my phone, and I did not reach for my glove box, and I did not say one word that wasn't asked of me. In the mirror, the vehicle behind me was a dark gray crossover with a reflective stripe down the flank in exactly the right proportion, a light bar throwing blue and white across the fronts of my neighbors' houses, and along the door in that flat, state-issue lettering, Kestrel Bend, HOA Enforcement. He came up on my B-pillar the way you're taught to, off the door frame, weak side back, weight on his rear foot, his flashlight held above and outside my sightline, so I couldn't see his face, and he could see all of mine. And he said, in a voice with no particular emotion in it, "Evening, sir. License and registration. You were doing 28 in a 25. I gave him my license. My name is Cal Rennick. I was 51 that year. I spent 8 years as a deputy in this county, 5 of them as a field training officer, which means my job was to sit in the passenger seat of a patrol car and teach brand new cops how to conduct a lawful traffic stop, when you can make one, what makes it a seizure, and exactly how much of a person's liberty you are allowed to take and under what authority. I retired 6 years ago. I teach 2 blocks a semester at the regional academy now, and one of them is a 3-hour class on unlawful stops and impersonation. They pulled over the only man on that street who teaches the class about why you can't do this. And I sat there for 19 seconds with my hands on the wheel and let him finish. I want to explain that, because everybody's first instinct is wrong, and it's the whole reason this story ends the way it does. Every fiber of a man wants to roll the window down and say you're not a cop and we both know it. And if I had, here's what would have happened. He backs off, mumbles something about a courtesy notice, gets in his car and leaves, and I've got nothing. Or better, I get out, he gets loud, I get loud, hands go somewhere, and now it's a scuffle in the street between 2 guys, my word against his, and I'm the 51-year-old with a temper who was mad about a speeding ticket. Impersonating a peace officer isn't a costume charge. In this state, it's not complete when you put the shirt on. It's complete when you assert the authority, when you use the appearance of office to make somebody do something they'd otherwise be free not to do. He needed to run the light bar. He needed to demand my license. He needed me to hand it over. Every second I sat there with my hands on that wheel, he was finishing the crime for me, in front of a dash cam I've never once turned off since the year they put them in patrol cars. Because 8 years of that job wires something into you that retirement doesn't unwire. So I let him take my license out of my hand. While he was writing, I read his chest. Nameplate, W. Tullis. And above it, pinned to a navy uniform shirt with creases you could shave with, a badge. Not a security patch, a shield. 7-point star, nickel finish, and in the center of it, I had to lean about 2 inches to be sure, and I was very sure, the seal of this state. And under the seal, in raised block letters, Officer. He came back with a slip of paper on a clipboard and handed it through the window, and he said, "You can take care of that online or mail it in. Slow it down, sir." And then he did the last thing, the thing that made my scalp go cold, which was he stood there and waited for me to pull out first, watching my taillights, the way you do, the way I taught 24 kids to do, because you never turn your back on a car you just stopped. That man had done this for real. I'd have bet my house on it inside of 30 seconds. I drove the 200 yards home and sat in my driveway with the engine off and looked at the paper under the dome light. It said, "Notice of Violation," across the top. It had a case number. It had a fine amount, $75. And at the bottom, on a perforated line, it had a tear-off stub with a remittance address and a box for a check number. You don't put a tear-off stub on a thing nobody's supposed to pay. Here's what I did not do. I did not call 911 that night. And that's the second decision that decided everything. Because I know exactly what happens when you call 911 at 9 at night and tell a dispatcher that a security guard gave you a fake ticket. A deputy comes out in an hour, takes a report, tells you it sounds like a civil matter with your HOA, and files it. One report. One man complaining. Nothing. You don't kill a machine like that with a complaint. You kill it with a file. So I spent the next 9 days building one. And I built it the way I'd build a case for a grand jury, which is boring and unglamorous and utterly lethal. I sent a records request to the association for its contract with a security vendor, which it was legally obligated to produce, and which, after 2 weeks and a letter from me quoting the statute number, it produced. The vendor was an outfit called Bastion Patrol Group. Then I went to the state's licensing board and looked up Bastion, because private security in this state requires a license, a bond, and individually registered officers. Bastion Patrol Group had no license. Not an expired one, not a pending one. Nothing. The company did not exist as a security company in the eyes of the state. Neither did any of its 4 employees. Then I looked at the light bar. And this is the part that people who haven't worn the uniform always miss. And it is not a technicality. The color blue on a moving vehicle in this state is reserved by statute to authorized emergency vehicles. Not discouraged, reserved. A private company running blue lights to stop civilians on a public access road isn't cutting a corner, any more than a man in a fake FBI jacket is doing a bit. The whole point of that color is that when a citizen sees it, they must stop. That's the entire reason the state owns it. Kestrel Bend Estates has 300 homes, and Deb Corliss had been its president for 6 years, and she'd built her whole reign on one product, which she sold to every buyer who ever toured a model home. We have our own police force. She said it in the newsletter. She said it at the gate. So at the April open meeting, I stood up and asked her exactly one question, in a room with 40 people and my phone on the table recording, because I wanted her answer preserved in amber. I asked her for Bastion's state security license number. She didn't have it. She didn't know what I was asking for. She got about 4 sentences into a speech about how some residents don't appreciate the safety they enjoy, and then she said the sentence I would eventually hear read aloud by a man with a warrant in his hand. Our officers have full authority inside Kestrel Bend. Full authority. Inside her subdivision. On streets the county plows. I sat down and didn't say anything else, because the woman was doing my work for me, and it seemed rude to interrupt. They stopped me again 11 days later, and this time it escalated, which I'd expected, because that's what happens when you ask a bully for a number he doesn't have. Same crossover, same blue lights, same Tullis. But this time, he told me to step out of the vehicle. And when I asked, calmly, on what authority, the only question I asked all night, he opened my door and put his hand on my upper arm and pulled. That's a seizure. That's a detention. In the eyes of the law, a stop is not a conversation, it's a temporary arrest, and a man in a fake badge who takes hold of your arm and prevents you from leaving has committed false imprisonment. And if he does it with a fake shield and a state seal on his chest, he's committed a felony on top of it. I didn't pull away. I didn't tense up. I let him move me, and I said, out loud, evenly, the way you talk for a recording. It's 9:04 p.m. I'm on Kestrel Bend Drive at the Fairmont intersection. The vehicle is Unit 2. The man with his hand on my arm is W. Tullis. Because a man who narrates is a man who has already won and just hasn't told you yet. 2 days later, the association fined me $400 for failure to comply with community public safety personnel. They cut me down, and then they billed me for the stumps. Sorry, different fight, same species. But something had happened at that stop that I didn't understand until I got home and pulled the audio off the dash cam and listened to it 3 times with headphones on. When Tullis handed my license back, he said, "Drive safe, 6140. 6140. My old badge number. 8 years, retired 6 years ago, on a shield in a box in my closet. There is no world in which a rent-a-cop reads that off a driver's license because it isn't on a driver's license. It isn't on a registration. It isn't in any public record you can pull with a name. That number lives in exactly one place: the State Law Enforcement Database, which is a closed, federal standard system and which requires a credentialed login, and which logs every single query with a user, a timestamp, and a reason. Somebody had run me. Somebody real. That's when this stopped being a story about 4 idiots in costumes. I went at Bastion's 4 employees the way you'd go at anybody, which is that I typed their names into the state's post-registry, Peace Officer Standards and Training. It's the licensing board for actual cops, and its decertification list is public, because when the state takes a man's badge, it doesn't do it quietly. 3 of the 4 were on it. Wayne Tullis, 44, decertified 2 years earlier by a department 3 counties over for falsifying reports. 2 others decerted for cause, 1 for excessive force, 1 for evidence handling. Not wannabes, not mall guys with a fantasy. 3 men who had genuinely been sworn peace officers of this state, and from whom this state had taken that away. And I sat there and understood the whole thing at once, and it was worse than what I'd been imagining. Deb Corliss hadn't hired actors. She'd hired the real thing, after it broke. She hadn't gone looking for men who could pretend to be cops. She'd gone looking for men who were cheap and available, and who came out of the box knowing the cadence, the stance, the paperwork, the flashlight discipline. And the reason they were cheap and available is that the state had taken their certification away for lying and for hurting people. She thought she was buying professionalism at a discount. What she was actually buying was the aggravating factor. Because here's the thing that a jury understands instantly and that Deb never once considered. A bad imitation is a costume. A perfect imitation is impersonation. The better Tullis was at that stop, the more correct his approach, the more real his badge, the more authentic his cadence, the more completely he had taken from me the thing the law actually protects, which is my ability to know whether the government is stopping me. He wasn't good at his job. His being good at it was the crime. And then I read the contract. Section 4 of the agreement between Kestrel Bend Estates HOA and Bastion Patrol Group set out the fee structure. And it wasn't a flat monthly rate. It was a base retainer plus 22. And I read this line about 6 times. 22. 30% of all violation notices collected remitted to the association. The tear-off stub. That's what the tear-off stub was for. People were paying. Of course they were paying. A man in a state seal badge hands you a $75 notice with a case number and a remittance address. And you're not a retired FTO. You're a nurse who works nights and doesn't need a problem. So you write the check. I got the collection ledger later. Over 4 years, 900 and some notices. Better than $60,000 collected. This was never about safety. It was a toll road with a badge on it. Deb Corliss had built a revenue stream out of frightening her own neighbors with the appearance of the state. And she took a 30% cut. And the men doing the frightening were men the state had already fired for lying. The third stop was the one I picked. They tried to pull me over on a Thursday evening near the gate, and this time I didn't stop. I put my hazards on to signal I wasn't fleeing, kept it under 25, dialed 911 on speaker, and told the dispatcher, slowly, giving her everything the way I used to want it given to me, that a private vehicle with unauthorized blue emergency lights was attempting to conduct a traffic stop on me, that I was not stopping, that I was proceeding to the sheriff's substation on Coldwater Road, and that I was recording. And Wayne Tullis followed me, with his lights on, all the way. He followed me for 2.5 miles, through the gate, out of Kestrel Bend, onto a public county road, and into the parking lot of a sheriff's substation, where 2 actual deputies were standing outside because dispatch had told them I was coming. He rolled into that lot with the light bar going. I have thought about that moment a lot, and I don't think it was stupidity. I think Wayne Tullis had spent 2 years being told by a woman with a newsletter that he had full authority inside Kestrel Bend. And somewhere in there, a man who'd already lost his certification once had started believing it again. Because believing it was more comfortable than the alternative. They put him face down across the hood of his own fake patrol car. My dash cam got all of it. The blue lights still turning, the badge with the state seal on it coming off his chest and into an evidence bag. A decertified officer being handcuffed in front of a building full of the real ones. That was the best night of my year, and it accomplished nearly nothing. Because on Friday, Deb Corliss sent a newsletter to 300 homes explaining that Bastion Patrol Group was restructuring its personnel, that the association had been as shocked as anyone by the conduct of one individual, and that community patrols would resume Monday under a new vendor name with enhanced oversight. One man in handcuffs. The machine didn't even slow down. She had 4 cars, a light bar budget, a rebrand, and a $60,000 revenue stream, and she'd just proven she could shed a man like a lizard drops a tail. You don't kill a machine like that with an arrest either. Same lesson, second verse. So I went back to badge number 6140, because that thread was still hanging. Every query in that database is logged. I wasn't a cop anymore, but I'd taught half that substation, and more importantly, I could file a formal complaint with the sheriff's own Office of Professional Standards, Internal Affairs, which has both the authority and the powerful institutional desire to find out who's been running unauthorized queries out of their own house. I gave them the date range, my old badge number, my name, my plate. It took them 4 days. Trey Hollins, 38. Active duty deputy, 6 years on. Working a side job. For Bastion. He'd run my plate and my name off his own credentialed login, on shift, and handed the results to Wayne Tullis. And it turned out he'd been doing more than that. He'd been riding along with Bastion on weekends. He'd been training them, walking them through approach discipline, teaching them the phrasing, reviewing their notice forms. That's why the stop had been so perfect. That's why the cadence was right. There was a real deputy inside that operation, with his hands on the wheel of it. I sat with that for about an hour before the second half of it landed, and when it did, I got up and walked around my kitchen because it was so much bigger than a criminal charge. There's a phrase in federal civil rights law, under color of law. Section 1983 of Title 42 lets you sue anyone who deprives you of a constitutional right while acting under color of state law. Normally, a private security guard isn't a state actor. He's just a guy, and roughing you up is an ordinary tort. But a private actor who acts jointly with a state official, a real, sworn, on-duty deputy who supplies the credentials, runs the queries, and trains the operation, becomes a state actor himself. The Joint Action Doctrine, first-year federal civil rights. Which means every one of those 900 stops wasn't a private nuisance. It was a Fourth Amendment seizure, performed under color of law by a private force operating jointly with a member of the Halloran County Sheriff's Office at the direction and for the profit of a homeowners association board. Not a fine, not a civil dispute with your HOA, a federal civil rights claim against Deb Corliss and every board member who voted for that contract, personally, brought by every single person they ever pulled over. I didn't take that to one place. I took it to 3. In 1 week, in identical packages. The District Attorney's Office, the state's Private Security Licensing Board, and the Sheriff's Office of Professional Standards. Dash cams from both stops. The audio of 6140. The post-decertification records for 3 of 4 men. The unlicensed vendor. The contract with the 30%. The collection ledger. Deb on my phone recording, in front of 40 of her neighbors, saying our officers have full authority inside Kestrel Bend. 3 agencies, 1 file, same week. Nobody had to be brave. Everybody just had to read. And then it got out of my hands, which is exactly what I wanted, and which is when the investigator from the state licensing board asked the question I hadn't thought to ask. She called me on a Monday, a woman named Ines Abaroa, who had the driest voice I've ever heard on a phone. And she said she had one thing she wanted to run down before Tuesday. She said, "The badges have the state seal on them. That's a separate offense, and it's a manufactured item. Somebody ordered those. Somebody ordered the light bars. Who signed the purchase order?" I told her I had no idea. She said, "The vendor will." They came at 9 in the morning on a Tuesday, into the Kestrel Bend clubhouse. Sheriff's investigators, 2 people from the state licensing board, and a warrant. I wasn't there. I heard it from 4 different neighbors within the hour, and I've watched the flatbed footage since, because somebody filmed it, and it went around that neighborhood faster than any newsletter Deb Corliss ever wrote. They took the badges out of a desk drawer in the clubhouse office. They took the light bars. They took the citation ledger, 4 years of it, and the bank account it fed. And in the parking lot, they winched 4 gray crossovers with reflective stripes and blue light bars onto flatbeds, one after another, in front of the clubhouse Deb had run for 6 years, while a woman from the state stood there with a clipboard checking VINs. And Deb Corliss came out and tried it. She actually tried it. She walked up to a sheriff's investigator standing next to a flatbed with her fake patrol car on it, and told him that this was an internal community matter, and that her officers had full authority inside Kestrel Bend. He asked her to repeat it. She did. He wrote it down. Then he explained to her, in the flattest voice imaginable, I'm told he was very polite about it, what the word officer means, who is allowed to use it, and who is allowed to own the color blue. The purchase order came back from the vendor 2 days later, which is what actually finished her. A badge manufacturer in another state, 3 years of orders. 8 custom 7-point shields, state seal, raised block lettering, officer. 4 12-volt light bars, blue and white, shipped to the Kestrel Bend clubhouse. Signed on the authorizing line by Deb Corliss. Her name. Her hand. Not a president who trusted a bad vendor. Not a woman who didn't know. The person who ordered the fake badges. She stopped being a witness the moment that PDF came through, and she'd done it to herself 3 years before she ever heard my name. The rest happened without me, which I'd say is the point. Tullis and 2 others were charged with impersonating a peace officer, plus false imprisonment on the stops where they'd laid hands. Trey Hollins was charged over the database queries, and the state pulled his certification. Which means the man who taught them how to be convincing cops is now, permanently, unable to be one. And he's on the same public post list where I found his students. Deb Corliss was charged as the organizer, because a purchase order is a hard thing to explain. Wexford Community Management was terminated for cause inside 3 weeks, which is what always happens once the manager who signed the invoices without reading them becomes a person of interest. The federal claim came next, a Section 1983 action on behalf of everyone Bastion ever stopped, naming the board members personally. And that's where the last domino went, and it's the one that Deb never saw, and I genuinely did not plan. The association's insurer read the file. Then they went and pulled Kestrel Bend's own application, the one Deb had signed every year at renewal, and found the line where she'd been asked to describe the community's security arrangement. She'd written, Unarmed Courtesy Patrol. Unarmed Courtesy Patrol. Not 4 decertified officers running blue emergency lights, conducting traffic stops with state seal badges, and issuing citations we take 30% of. The carrier rescinded the policy ab initio, void from inception, for material misrepresentation on the application. Not, we won't cover this claim. There was never any coverage, retroactively, for any of it. Every dollar of defense, every dollar of judgment, on a federal civil rights claim against the board members individually, and no policy behind it. And no policy behind it going back years. They'd lied to their own insurance company about the thing they were bragging about in the newsletter. So when the bill came, 5 people met it with their own houses. The seized ledger paid restitution to every resident who'd ever written a check against one of those $75 notices with a tear-off stub. Some of them got 4 years of money back. The recall petition took 9 days, which I'm told is a Halloran County record for a thing like that. And the new board's first act was to hire a landscaping company, and nothing else. I still teach 2 blocks a semester at the academy. My unlawful stops and impersonation class runs 3 hours, and about halfway through it, I pass something around the room, and I make every one of them hold it. It's a 7-point shield, nickel finish, state seal in the middle. Raised block letters underneath. Officer. The kids always say the same thing, every semester without fail. They turn it over in their hands and they look up and say, "This looks real." And I say, "That's the whole class." Here's the part that trips everybody up. Cal beat them by doing nothing. Every instinct says, roll the window down and tell the guy you know he's a fraud. Do that, and he drives off and you've got a story. Cal sat with his hands on the wheel for 19 seconds and let Wayne Tullis complete a felony on camera. Because impersonation isn't wearing the shirt, it's asserting the authority. And it isn't finished until you comply. He didn't need to fight. He needed to be a victim. Precisely, on video, in a way nobody could argue with later. Now flip it to Deb. Her fatal move looks like her smartest one. She didn't hire cosplayers, she hired men who'd actually worn the badge, because they were cheap and came pre-trained. The state had taken their certification away for lying and for hurting people, and she never checked, because the post-decertification list is public, and she'd have had to want to know. A bad imitation is a costume. A perfect imitation is impersonation. Their competence was the crime. If you take anything, the post registry is public. Look up anyone claiming to enforce anything. Blue lights belong to the state. And a state seal badge isn't a technicality. It's a manufactured item somebody ordered and somebody signed for. She sold "We have our own police force" in the newsletter and wrote "Unarmed Courtesy Patrol" on the insurance form. Those 2 sentences cost 5 people their houses. So, was Cal right to hand over that license? Or would you have said something?